coming. That's great, great turnout. Appreciate it. Let's see, this must be week 4, I believe. Is that right? Of our 40th anniversary edition of the HFF Summer Seminar Series. And what we are doing this summer is kind of looking both back and forward in each of the main areas in which HFF has worked for 40 years and will continue to work. And so last week, the panel talked about the formation of the Henry's Fork Watershed Council, which is kind of our primary vehicle for implementing science-based collaboration. And one of the things we did talk about was the fact that although the Watershed Council can and has done big projects on its own, probably the council has helped in the biggest way by all the side conversations that we have during breaks or at lunch, before the meeting, on field trips. And those side conversations have resulted in a lot of partnerships that have occurred because we met each other through the council or through organizations we all have interacted with, like Friends of the Teton River. And then those collaborations turn into project-specific partnerships that have allowed a lot of stuff to happen on the ground. So we're really pleased, and I'm really excited to have all these folks. Let me introduce them, and then I'll start with the questions here. So I'll start here with Steve Reynolds, who's a farmer here east of Ashton, and also is it president of Conant Creek Canal Company? Correct. However you have your canal company structured out here, which is Conant Creek's tributary to Fall River, and the canal company serves Irrigator's kind of on the south side of Fall River there, east of town. Daniel Wilcox, he's Farms and Fish Program Manager jointly for Henry's Fork Foundation and Friends of the Teton River, so he's going to wear both of those hats today. And then Wyatt Penfold, whom I've known now for 9 years, something like that. So farmer in Teton Valley in the Darby Creek area, and is the mastermind and co-founder behind Teton Basin Water Users Association. He'll talk about that a little more. And then Scott Yates, who is retired, but worked for Trout Unlimited for decades.
25.
There you go, it's decades. And also served somewhere along in there as interim executive director for HFF. So he does have a little connection with HFF there. So the way we've done this so far is I let the oldest person go first and last. So it's the most experienced. The most experienced, that's what I did. I let Mick go first 2 weeks ago. Let Jan go first last week to get the experience. No, I let Jan go first because she had the longer experience with the Henry's Fork Watershed Council. Scott has the longest experience in these collaborative partnerships involving HFF and FTR, so I'll let him go first. So Scott, HFF has always had a strong partnership with Trout Unlimited. Why don't you tell us kind of how that partnership started and how it's evolved to address changing challenges over the years?
Yeah, you bet. No, it's great to be here, Rob. It's funny. I was telling Rob, this is kind of my first time out of the cage since I retired in any type of public forum. So who knows what I'm going to say today? I don't have any strings like I used to. So talking about partnerships, I always like to think about kind of like, how are partnerships formed, right? And if I'm going to take folks back to when I first kind of came to Southeast Idaho, I first kind of came here to work. I was based out of Portland, Oregon, and I came here to work for Trout Unlimited. And there were all sorts of things going on that kind of framed the partnership orientation at the time. We had a bunch of Endangered Species Act listings in the Columbia River Basin, so we had salmon and steelhead, especially Chinook and steelhead, that were listed in the around 1992 to 1995, 1996. Started to really get people talking about what needs to be done. Made a lot of people nervous, made some people energetic, but the bottom line is people didn't know what to do. So we had that. We also had some really, really tough water years. We had some big water years in the late 90s. And then we had some tough water years in the early 2000s. And so we had places like the Klamath River Basin. We used to joke about the Klamath being the K word because it was really a tough dynamic. You had substantial amount of civil disobedience going on. There was clashing between farmers, some of the ranchers in that community with the Bureau of Reclamation, the federal government, some of the environmental communities. So there were a lot of difficult things going on. But it's been my experience through my years working for TU and then also just working on water law and policy issues that a lot of times that's when some of the best partnerships are actually formed. You've got crisis to some extent. You've got people who are very, very interested in innovative conversations. In other words, they know things are changing, whether that be climate, whether it be from a farming, ranching perspective, operational, or whether it be from a conservation standpoint. I know Trout Unlimited was taking a really hard look at how do we work on water issues in the West. And we were we had worked with some organizations in other states, mainly Pacific Northwest states, that had taken a little bit more of a litigation bent when they were working on water issues. And, I had grown up in a Forest Service family. My dad had been in the Forest Service for 4 years. I lived in small towns all over the Pacific Northwest, mainly Eastern Oregon and Washington. But I felt like we could establish a program that would put people in rural communities to try and build relationships, build trust, and figure out what kind of projects we could do to make things a little bit different over time that were sustainable, that people could support. And at the time, another current event was Trout Unlimited didn't necessarily have the best relationship in the Upper Snake River Basin. We'd been on a piece of NEPA litigation in the late 80s. And you do those type of things in water communities, a lot of times people don't forget. And you have to figure out how to dig yourself out of that hole a little bit. Because a lot of times, and this is my own, this is why I look at those type of things, as someone who actually is a lawyer by trade, recovering lawyer, I like to add, but if you're gonna litigate something, you better be pretty sure about what the remedy is. And I think a lot of times the environmental community was not sure back then what the remedy was. And so they ended up, even if you win a piece of litigation, so what? If you win a NEPA litigation, all that does is basically send the agency back to the drawing board. They do another round of public comment and might adjust it a little bit, but it may not necessarily end up either fixing something or certainly not building the relationships you need to actually change something. So from in that context, Trout Unlimited, when I came in, kind of an odd partnership with the Henry's Fork Foundation, but Trout Unlimited lent me to the HFF as the executive director for a year. I worked with the board on just working on a few things, hiring a long-term executive director, Steve Trafton, who then would be the executive director for I think almost nine years, I think, after that. But a lot of that partnership was wrapped around at the time a title transfer negotiation here in the Henry's Fork Basin, which was a really, really big deal. Just as a little background, around the West at the time, a lot of the irrigation community really was trying to own a lot of the facilities that they had historically, stored water in with their water rights. And, but it's a federal process. And what ended up, short story is, they had originally wanted to transfer Island Park Dam, but that was kind of a non-starter for a variety of reasons. But ended up transferring the Chester facilities, some of the pertinent facilities like the Teton exchange wells. And I think it ended up being a really good deal for Fremont Madison. I think they had more control over their own destiny on an annual basis. And then, but it also created, within that legislation, created the drought management planning process, which has ended up being a really, really, really strong part of this community. And it hasn't enabled everybody to agree all the time. And there have still been really, really tough water years where it's a really, really difficult discussion. But I don't know many places in the West where you have that type of strategy that was federally legislated and agreed upon by the conservation community and the irrigation community. And there have been a lot of really, really good, folks that through the rest of my career, like Dale Swenson at the Fremont Madison Irrigation District, who, I would see at farming and ranching, in industry meetings, in Vegas, Reno, all over the place, where Dale would come up and he would still be a friend. We'd talk about things throughout the West. And that was the context of the Trout Unlimited and HFF partnership. Frankly, that's where it kind of kick-started. And then throughout the years, I've been such a huge fan and supporter of the HFF model. The Watershed Council, the ability to work with farmers and ranchers, the angling community, it really is unique throughout the West. And to be honest, I've used that model as we built programs in 8 Western states. You know, I really came back to that model, which is to try to hire people who are going to live and work in that community, who are going to try to get to know the farm and ranch community, and then start with that, and then see where you can go in terms of change and also reaction to some of the current events, whether it's drought, climate, or whether it's things like groundwater use. All these things that have really kicked in over the last 20, 25 years. But the hub between the HFF and the TU was around that partnership, that initial partnership around a little bit of crisis and people feeling like they needed to innovate, whether that was in the farm and ranch community or whether it was in the conservation community.
Great, thanks. That's a good introduction. And Wyatt, I was thinking, I think the first time we met in person was maybe in early 2016. I think you invited, I think maybe Jamie and Christina went with me. Does that sound right? And we came over, it was like in January or something, to a meeting to talk about groundwater, surface water interactions, really, water use in Teton Valley. And so talk about how, I don't even know how I got invited to be there. So how you engaged FTR, Friends of Teton River, HFF, and other partners, that was 8 years ago, 9 years ago, on how that ended up helping you form the Teton Basin Water Users Association.
Well, that goes back, I think somebody just threw your name out as the best hydrologist that knew what was going on, so that's why you got sucked into it. So,
Okay.
But that group was formed. You know, I look back. My farm's been running for 100 years. So I look back what my ancestors did, and they were always protective of their water, no matter what they did. I mean, we filed in Wyoming, Idaho, everywhere we could file to protect our water. And as things were progressing, I could see the writing on the wall that if we weren't all together, each one of the groups, then we were going to be bickering no matter what happened. And so my Spot and Farm Bureau, and then we got the Soil Conservation District together, and then we brought in FTR, because FTR actually had a bad name with farmers back then, and it was really hard. And I would always tell all the farmer side, it's okay, you always keep your enemies closer than your friends, so we gotta know what's going on. So that's why we're doing this together. And you could just see the partnership work, because as we projected out what was going to happen, we could tell, conjunctive management, the Snake River Plain was just getting started then. We could see all the writing on the wall, and so we decided we would rather be at the table than on the table, because if you're at the table, you have a say. If you're on the table, you don't get to decide how much salt's put on you. And so together we were able to start that, start looking at everything that was going on in the Teton Basin. So that's why we brought hydrologists in that understand the interchange with surface water and groundwater. And we actually plated our whole model, because all our ancestors said, if you throw the water out early, the Teton River runs colder and longer through the year. And we had all kind of known that, but with the push to become, more efficient with your water, all these things, we could see that our aquifer is actually drying up. And so to bring all that back in with a good model was our main goal. And so the partnership between the nonprofit organizations, the farmers, all that was to bring about more of a symbiotic relationship between those that have the water and those that want to use the water different ways than what we're using it. And so we were able to see that we could actually make the streams run colder for longer, which was helping the fish. There was a whole off the side things that the farmers weren't worried about, that was happening, as well as, you know, we were trying to hit and see if we could actually affect the flow of the Teton River, which is where the hydrologists come into it. And through that modeling, we're actually able to see, yes, we can work together, we can affect the stream flows, bring things back to how they were more in, probably you're looking at, you know, the 1800 type thing. We did want to go back to the you know, the Indian time, because the Indians only spent a month and a half in Teton Valley. Because that was the only time the river was really flowing, you know, there was sagebrush everywhere. And we really didn't want to go back to that one, which was probably our way it'd end up now if they take our water. Because there's nothing up there. You know, we'd end up having to put a dam in Darby or something like that to feed all the people that are living there now. But it's through that symbiotic relationship that we have with the Henry's Fork, the Teton River, or the Friends of Teton River. You know, we've worked a little bit with the Forest Service, all those things that has brought about the change in the valley, so that we can say, yes, if we all work together, we can actually take that. And when, you know, when I go talk to the director of the Department of Water, he's like, how did you do that? You know, how does everybody work together? But it's more down to, we all need to work together, otherwise none of our goals actually get met, because it doesn't do us any good to fight those, you know, fighting between ourselves over the same water. We can actually use it and are able to benefit everybody's goals that are out there and that we have. So, you know, now we've actually got after 6 years of modeling, we actually have proven to the farmers that they need to join together. So we've got the Teton Basin Water Users Association working. You know, that's got us a lot more clout with the Department of Water, with our downstream users, Madison, Fremont, some of those kind of things. So now we can step into the next set of goals, which is, you know, actually protecting our water resources, hopefully mitigating some calls that come from the farmer side, as well as keeping more water in the rivers for the recreators, the fish, all those kind of things. So, you know, we go back, I water out Darby Creek. Darby Creek hardly ever hits the river. I don't even think it quite hit it this year. And so that's been able to make it so that one of the purest cutthroat streams up there, because if we can keep it out of the river, it's a lot better. And that's only going to happen if we're pulling all the water out like it has been traditionally. So some of those traditional things actually help save some of the even more traditional things that are around us. So that working together really does help all of us.
Great, thanks. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there. I'm gonna turn to Daniel here. So Daniel, your family farms, your extended family's got a potato processing facility in Rexburg.
Yep.
You've got an agriculture degree. You work for a implement dealer. You came from agriculture. Why in the world? What possessed you to come work for the Henry's Fork Foundation after that background?
Yeah, so I would say my generational family experience for our farm, the farm ground that we have now, we've farmed for over 50 years. Obviously, we've farmed in the valley for generations beyond that, but that is the farm ground that I grew up on. I worked on it as soon as I could, was willing and able to, and spent a lot of hours managing water on that farm. Our farm is near the confluence of the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Teton River. And so we're very subjective to water management as a whole. In my my first real life experience with I would call it a water management disaster was 1997, which was about a record year. I'm not sure what the flows on the South Fork were at that time, but I was 5 years old, and I distinctly remember driving down to one end of our farm, and it's totally flooded out because of the South Fork flows that year. And you just driving down, you'd see each fence post disappear more and more and more into the water until it was just completely submerged. So, you know, that showed me at a very young age how much water implications can affect the profitability of the farming operation. And so, our water rights for that farm are also from spring-fed sloughs. We're not part of a canal company like a couple of these irrigators here. We don't have storage water. We're subject to the water that is delivered from those springs. And now I've learned a lot more that there's a lot more similar cases in that throughout all of Idaho. But to me, I thought it was very unique. And so with that, we had our own struggles when I was a teenager of basically the water rights are really early. 1885 is our first initial water right, 1890, 1895. So very early, and we are the largest quantity on that system. There's a couple other farms that are part of that as well. But what we had in the early 2000s was these networks of sloughs that provided us with spring-fed water flowed right past other people's properties. And as we saw some development changes prior to 2008, you know, the run of selling off some farm ground for development, we saw a lot of like, 20-acre parcels sold. They'd go and drop an irrigation pump in that water because there, water flows right past through my property, it must be mine, So there's kind of a disconnect there between actual water right authority and property management and stuff. And so I thought it was really funny when I came to work for HFF. I remember distinctly one question that was asked of me is, do I know what prior appropriation means? And I don't remember my exact answer then. It was obviously yes, and I kind of documented that background. But one of my experiences was as a 15-year-old kid telling another farmer that due to prior appropriation, he can't pump this water until I have my full allocation. So, yeah, I knew from an early age some water and flow dynamics of irrigation water. I stepped into pursuing agriculture as a career, so I went to Utah State, got some education there, and at that time we saw a really big ramp up. So this is 2010. Saw a really big ramp up in farming with precision management, right? We saw GPS systems, we saw prescription fertilizer applications, better equipment for better seed spacing, just kind of like this, you had your mechanization revolution in the 50s to the 70s, but now we're seeing a technological revolution. And so that was where my interests was in technology. And so that led me to work for the local John Deere dealership, in which then I started forming relationships with other farmers in the area. And my dynamic with my clientele was usually, how can I better their operation? It was never, how do I get rich off of these folks? And so that led me to, after working in that for a few years, led me to just wanting to pursue something else outside of I guess, the corporate world of agriculture, which is very large, especially here when we are growing at the pace and scale that we are farm-wise. And so the opportunity at HFF came up, and I think it's been a really good partnership from the get-go. And yeah, just I've been really excited and hope to keep working here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, same here. Actually, before I ask Steve a question here. I should point out, these three are definitely the, poster folks for technology on farm. I've been over, we had was it Watershed Council tour or FDR tour or something? We went to your farm and you gave us like the full high-tech explanation of farming over there. But anyway, yeah, technology's been a big part of farming operations, all three of these guys. Steve, a lot of folks here may not know anything about Conant Creek, where it is, much less Conant Creek Canal Company. How about you start with just a description of your canal company, how it works, how many folks are on it, and then how you ended up partnering with HFF to do this big canal project, and then maybe describe that a little bit.
Yeah, you bet. So, Conant Creek Canal, so I'm the president of the canal, but we also, there's only about 7 farmers on the canal, and we run about half of the water. So it's kind of a big deal just for our operation alone. And it's south of Fall River, like you were talking about earlier. And it's kind of interesting, the history of that canal. They put that in the late 1800s, and I don't know how they did it. Like, I tell you what, that is, I remember we hired a guy to go clean the canal one year, and he was just a younger guy out of Idaho Falls, and when he was up there working on it, he's like, this is the gnarliest canal I've ever seen. You picture canals, and you picture this nice meandering canal through the middle of the fields. That's not the way the Conant Creek Canal is. I mean, it's on the edge of Conant Creek, of the canyon there, and it follows that canyon, and it's pretty wild. And it's amazing that back in the 1800s they were able to build that canal. And there's places on that canal, like we have these 2 pumping stations, and the one that's farther downstream, like just eyeballing it, you're like, there is no way that pump is a lower elevation than the other pump. Like, there's spots in that canal where the elevation hardly ever changes. So it's a wild canal, and I remember being just a young boy, like 8 or 9 years old, and farmers, I tell you what, you want to make a farmer mad, try to take his water. I mean, I remember being 8 or 9 years old, it'd be 4 in the morning, and I would hear somebody knocking on my dad's door, back when he was president of the canal, because so-and-so was running 7 birds on his lawn, and he was only supposed to run 5. And that guy was waking my dad up at 4 in the morning to turn him in for it. And so, you know, it's just crazy how upsetting it can be. But also, it's been interesting learning the history of this canal. Like, I was looking through some notes, and you go clear back to like 1950, they were having these meetings about how could they make the Conant Creek Canal more efficient. And they had ideas of what they could do. They talked about how they could put pumps in Drummond and pump the water up in Drummond, so they're not using that upper part of the canal, because we know there's a lot of loss up there, and it's not efficient, and it breaks out all the time, the way that soil is. And like I was trying to describe to you, it's like a straight canyon drop off. When that canal breaks, it's a disaster. I mean, it makes a huge mess. And it, you know, sometimes it can be 3 or 4 days fixing it, plus the damages that are caused as it breaks, and you have all the debris that's going into the creek, which ends up going into Fall River, and it's just a bad situation. And so this is something that's been talked about since the 1950s. So why hasn't it been done till now? The farmers have talked about it, so why has it taken so long? Well, first of all, I gotta give a lot of credit to Daniel and Brandon for the work that they put into this project, because this would have never happened without them. Without you guys, without Henry's Fork Foundation. This is something that would have been talked about forever, but would have never actually came to pass. And one of the main reasons why is you just look at the financial end of it. For the farmers to dish out the money to pay to get this canal lined would have cost more per acre than what the ground is even worth. And so there's no feasible way that we would ever get the farmers to actually say, yeah, we're going to be able to put out that much money. They're better off just selling their farm and walking away, or dry farming it or something like that. So it would have never been feasible. And Daniel has done a great job of being able to look into all these grants, all these programs, that as farmers, we get busy. It's not really our area of expertise, and we don't really have the time to do it. And Daniel and Brandon have done an awesome job of lining all this out and making it happen. Like I said, something that's been talked about since the 1950s is now finally, and it's just incredible to go up on that canal, and it's almost like, you know, I still just, you know, stop every once in a while and go, this is actually really happening. Something I heard my dad talk about when he was president, something that I can find in notes that was way before my dad's time, them talking about what are they going to do about this upper stretch of the canal. And now it's finally taking place. And so I'm excited to see the water savings that is going to be there. How much more water we're going to have in the creek that's going to make it into the water, you know, make it down to the dams and in the rivers, and plus the benefits that it gives us farmers, having a more even water flow through this season and not having to worry about the canal breaking out, you know, and opening up that huge canyon and things like that. Like, it's just been this is awesome that we've been able to do this. So,
For a little context, yeah, the project is to line, what about the upper half, I think?
yeah, so it's about 7 miles
Yeah.
of liner, and this year,
Yeah.
so the funding's mostly been in place to do the whole thing. And so I think we've lined 4 miles of it so far. There's 3 miles to go. And that idea of lining that is gonna keep all that seepage. The way that dirt is up there, and it's the way any canal is, you just get a lot of loss in a canal. And so we're hoping to minimize the losses that are in the canal. And then we've done some other projects like an automated head gate system, and eventually we'll get that completed. And then after that, we're hoping that we can continue on with the next leg down, because then there's still, after we do this, there'll still be about 3 miles of open ditch that goes into a pond. And so after we get this project done, we'll move on to the next one and work on that. And we also not only just farm on that canal, but we have water on all the canals in Ashton. And it's just been interesting as I see some of these other canals, and I'm just like thinking in my mind, I'm like, okay, we get the Concord Canal job done. I know what I want to talk to Daniel about, because I'm seeing these other things, like they are wasting so much water right there. That is stupid. Like, why are they doing it that way, you know? And so I'm excited that, you know, I think this is going to be something that's going to be long-term with Henry's Fork Foundation, and we couldn't be doing this without them. And this water is only going to get worse, the water situation, and why not work together now to make it better? Because I don't want to dog on the farmers, but sometimes farmers, they get so focused on their operation and what they're doing, and then there's such a little margin a lot of the years of money that we can make. And so if we're spending all this money on water conservation and we end up losing money, we're going to go out of business. And so being able to have people that are willing to partner and be able to come up with funds and ideas to make this work is just, it's been awesome. So
I should make a point of clarification about lining and efficiency and all that. So Wyatt actually is just saying, boy, the thing we want to do is return to the old inefficient flood irrigation, put that water on the ground as soon as it's out there in the spring, get it in the ground, it'll seep back into the river, like you said, colder later in the summer. Here we're doing the opposite, and I will say that when we applied for the funding, there is now a requirement in the application for, I think it was a Water Smart, and I had to actually, Daniel said, here, we need this hydrology piece, and it said you got to document the water savings, and then you have to say, well, what would have happened to that water that seeped through the canal? You're harming, you know, you have to show that you're doing no harm to someone else. And so I actually had to do the modeling and the calculations, and it turns out that when we did the Henry's Fork Basin study with Reclamation through the Watershed Council back in 10, 11, 12, and then it was finally, I think, approved in 2015, we actually went through the process of looking at all of the canal systems in the whole basin, determining which ones where the seepage was beneficial because it recharged aquifers, it benefited downstream users, and which ones were actually we would benefit from lining. And it turned out that when I did the modeling and we went through the stakeholder process, all of these canals out east of Ashton, we would come out ahead by lining them and making them more efficient. Then we had a bunch of others that we wanted to make less efficient, like the ones in Teton Valley and on Egan Bench. So we actually had to go through the process, and it's dependent on local geology, how the aquifer works, where it is in the system, what the downstream uses are, and this one came out, we would have more water in Fall River during the time period when Island Park Reservoir draft would be needed, so we're all gonna save more water, save storage, save money by lining this one. Opposite happens on your end, where you actually wanna get the water out on the ground in the spring. So again, it was another outcome of the Henry's Fork Watershed Council that the analysis of all this turned out, and so we use that plan or that basin study as a template to go back to reclamation and say, look, we said we were gonna line these, here's an application. Or in Wyatt's case, here's applications for funding to do managed aquifer recharge. So anyway, just wanna make that clear. This is all based on a lot of not only science, but also stakeholder engagement. All the parties were at that basin study table to come up with these recommendations. Now, reclamation is funding, implementation, and other entities. I want to go back to something Wyatt mentioned and then maybe throw a tougher question to Scott about this. So Wyatt mentioned that on Darby Creek, that's one of the tributaries of the Teton River, flows off the Teton Range on the east side of the valley. It has an isolated, pure population of Yellowstone cutthroat trout, the native trout, and we've been FTR and Fish and Game and Wyoming Game and Fish have been monitoring that population for years. It has stayed isolated in part because of what it describes, which is the practice of diverting as much of that water, or all of it if you can, out of the creek, and that has prevented upstream migration of non-native fish from Teton River. In the scientific community, we have this debate all the time. Do you reconnect tributaries or do you keep them disconnected? And here again, it's site specific based on the science. But I'm going to throw the tough question to Scott, which is Trout Unlimited is Trout Unlimited, and you all work on systems that have native fish remaining. They were there and they're still there. You all work on the Henry's Fork, right, where you've got, it's all non-native. You work on tailwater fisheries below big dams where trout weren't even native. How does TU view that broad spectrum of fish conservation?
That's a great question.
And you brought up salmon and steelhead, so you might as well throw that in there too.
Yeah, well, I mean, over the years, we've had a lot of roundtable discussions, both, we're an organization, well, I can't speak for TU here, but I'm talking about my experience. We're a pretty big grassroots organization. We've got a lot of members. We had, anywhere from when I started around 50,000 members and up to around 250 when I retired. And so we have a mechanism where the grassroots participates along with a lot of professional staff. When I first started in 1997, I think myself and my boss were the only two full-time staff west of the Mississippi. When I finished, I think we had over 175 west of the Mississippi. So, we had a lot of growth, and these were the type of discussions we would have, because there were certain people in the organization who want to just focus on native fish alone, literally just, it's so important with climate change and all these issues that are facing native fish. That should be the priority. But at the same time, we have a lot of members, and then also a lot of the issues that we were focused on, like water. It was really important to look at some of these places throughout the West where they were wild trout oriented, not just native fish. And what's really interesting about that is a lot of times in the West, that means if you're going to work on a wild trout issue in the West, you're going to have a storage issue. You're going to have a dam that's been put there in place that has basically evolved a new ecosystem since that dam was put in place. And that's either good or bad depending on who you're talking to. But at the same time, it still focuses everyone on important issues around the environment in those type of watersheds. You've got water quality, you've got water quantity. All those things are very, very important, whether or not you've got a native fish present or a wild fish present. And so later in my career, we identified priority watersheds. So we would actually work with the grassroots and the professional staff, and we would identify in each of the states where we work priority watersheds. Some of those watersheds were based on native fish presence, and so there would be an emphasis on that. and other places it would be where there were wild trout populations, like the Henry's Fork. So I think we got to be, overall flexible in the way that we would kind of define our work and organize our work. But it's not an easy scenario. And especially where those issues get tough is where you're in a community and you've got, for instance, an issue like irrigation, where some people may have, especially, some people may have presupposed that because someone is irrigating, that is the primary factor in terms of, like, the current factor in what limits that native fish population. And that may not always be the case. And Rob talked about it, Wyatt talked about it. I mean, you have to take a look at what is the local geology, what is the local hydrology, and let that potentially drive whatever the partnership solution is. And we've had a lot of those scenarios. Rob and I used to talk a lot about this. We've actually done a lot of projects, especially early in our water program between 2000 and 2010 or 15. We were helping install a lot of pivot systems, a lot of sprinkler irrigation systems. And we did that, but we did that with the knowledge of the local geology. We didn't do it willy-nilly. We would hire somebody like Rob, but a local hydrologist who would help us look at that system. And a lot of times what we were trying to do is create more flexibility for a little bit more water in late August, September. And so a lot of times we would allow irrigation, could be flood irrigation, but certainly, once we installed the sprinkler irrigation, we designed it in a way where we maximize the ability to provide that late season flow. So irrigation flow early and then in the middle part of that summer, but then in the late season, weaning off a little bit of water. And we would do that in a market context, so we would acquire that water. A lot of times we did multi-year leases, 5, 10, 15, even 20-year leases, where the operator, the irrigator, was able to make that decision. They'd partner with us to make their system more efficient, but then we would measure flows later in the summer that would allow them to knock off the water, and the fishery would retain that. But there are a lot of places, I finished my career working in the Upper Green, and there's a lot of places there where it's very similar to the Upper Teton, where we don't want to mess with that early season irrigation, we don't want to mess with that flood operation. And in places where they have messed with it, it hasn't always ended up well for the fisheries and for the ecosystem. So, but it's very, very complicated. The best solution, back to the partnership scenario, is you have the agricultural, the farmer, the rancher right at the table with you. You have some science mixed in, some good hydrology, and then you have a really, really good federal funding source for whatever that partnership solution is.
Thanks. I'm gonna, in a minute, ask you all about the challenges and opportunities thing and kind of prime you with that. But got a minute here. Does anyone have questions for anybody? I saw some folks look like they wanted to ask some. Yeah.
To the three of you
Yeah.
involved in farming, what impact has urbanization had on your water? Because obviously they're extracting water, coupled with the way that the farms are treated by those new water users.
Okay, let me jump into it first.
Sure,
Go ahead.
So up where I farm, we actually, that's why I go back to my ancestors, because they actually set it up thinking that would probably happen. So in our irrigation bylaws and everything, we have it so that if it goes into a subdivision, that they have to monitor all the water and everything that's going in it. And so it's not, the other irrigation companies around us are having terrible problems. You look at what's happening in Victor and those kind of things. They've just got subdivisions going everywhere and they can't get their water where it's supposed to be, and everybody's whining about flooding things out and all those kind of things. I was lucky because my, grandpa, great grandpa, they were looking at some of those things that might happen.
They thought about
And so
urbanization.
they thought about that, and so, all of ours is divided into shares, and they won't deliver water to anything under 40 acres. So all those little subdivisions, they have to put in a meter, they have to have it all completely internal, those kind of things. And it's those forethoughts that actually really help where I'm at. But, you know, in Teton Valley, it's terrible with some of those other places, because they've got big subdivisions and they've got a canal running right through the middle of it, and then they go in and push the canals over, and it's just a terrible mess, you know. We got the overflow ditches that we run for our recharge and stuff, you know, we've got those run through some subdivisions, but we're really not too worried about when they put a dam across it, you know, and try to make their yard perfect, because it's like, slow the water down. We want it to go into the ground, and that's perfectly fine. So there's some of that trade-off in between, but, you know, it's really hard to catch up when you have those urbanization problems.
What about the impact on the aquifer?
And we've noticed, because all the urban guys, they like to have the creek running through the backyard and that kind of stuff until it floods their basement, you know. And there's places that my ancestors, like, you don't put a basement from this line towards the river, you just don't do it. But as we've gone away from flood irrigation and those kind of things, those places have actually dried up. So I have one house I own in Driggs, and it actually had a spot and everything for a sump pump, because every spring it flooded. It didn't matter, and it's on the east side of Driggs, and there used to be farms all the way around that side of Driggs, and they all used to flood irrigate. So they just planned for it, but in today's world, that doesn't happen anymore. You just, you know, everybody complains and terrible and all those kind of things. But that's the catch-22 about growth, because without growth, you're stagnant, you die. With growth, you got all the growing pains that go with it. So it's just finding that happy medium on how to do it. And I think that's one of the big things that we're trying to do in our organization as well, is that community outreach, because they have to want to, you know, we're trying to hope they pony up money so that we can actually continue doing the recharge, because, you know, some reports here say, you know, this is my thinking of where the water level is, you know, we're at least 70, 80 feet lower than when I was a kid up there in the valley. Because I remember going out towards Bates fishing, and we used to just get right outside of town, and we'd just be able to throw our rod in a little creek and pull fish. And now you're clear down, you know, another 1.5 miles before you even hit those springs and live water. You look at what Teton Springs is, you know, all, you know, up there, they're not getting as much water out of their springs. You got Huntsman Springs right there, right to the west of Driggs. They put all those wandering pathways, you know, that were supposed to be in the swamp ground. None of them are even in the swamp. So you can see what that correlation is, just that easy. When they started Huntsman Springs, they needed them there, and what's it been, not even 10 years, and it's all dried up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
well, couple of things, Wyatt. I'm curious, you said, well, first of all, let me ask, water rights and subdivisions are complicated matter, aren't they? So a subdivision has to have a water right in order to be on the canal system and how does that generally work? Does the developer search for properties that will come with water rights?
It all
Or,
depends
you know,
on the developer.
Because they can also develop so that they're individual domestic wells.
Yep.
In which case they wouldn't have any.
Yeah,
they
and
wouldn't-
none of our water's potable, because it all comes, you know, unless they're gonna put a treatment plant and that kind of stuff in. And our water's only delivered from April 15th to October.
Yeah, but sometimes those
So-
water rights are for like,
Yeah, there's a few
The
stock water rights, that kind of
golf
stuff.
course
but-
or something
yeah.
at
Yeah, but,
what used
you
to be
know,
Huntsman.
it just depends on the system you're in
Yeah.
the valley, how it does. But like on my system, ours is, each piece of land already has the water rights tied with it. They have the delivery system, but if we're gonna deliver it, they have to meet
Yeah,
those, because then we can know how much water usage is going on and all those kind of things, because we actually have a sliding scale depending on how much the creek is flowing. And so then everybody takes equal cuts on those water rights as it goes through, so.
And then the other thing was, you said that they push over your canals. What did you mean by that?
Oh, they'll just go in and, you know, the guy coming in to do the subdivision will just wipe everything smooth and put a road through and forget culverts. I mean, you're just like, really, guys? Yeah, we have that all the time.
Really?
They don't understand that it's like, it's actually a canal, it's actually,
Yeah.
there's a right of way there, they need to leave it
Yeah,
alone.
that it's not just a ditch.
It's not just
Yeah.
a creek or something,
Yeah.
that they'll just go think, and they own the land, so they think they can go do whatever they want right there, but there's actually a right of way for that
And,
irrigation.
Right,
and
so
I don't know how your county is, but like our county, all those right of ways, they're in the Department of Water stuff, but they haven't moved them onto the GIS.
In the county.
And so if nothing's on the GIS, it's not there. So you're like, it's been there since 1900.
We've got part of the corner canals in the pipeline, and there was a guy that bought some land and started to develop it, and he actually hit the pipeline. And that should have been in, you know, when he bought that property, it should have all been told to him that it was there and disclosed and that, and he hit it, and so it shut the whole pipeline down. So all the farmers are stopped, and he was just mad that it was there and that it was, you know, and we ended up fixing it as quick as we could so we get water going again. And then he was just like, well, I didn't know that was there. Well, I'm gonna tap into that so I can water, you know, now that he was all excited because he's like, he thought he found gold. He's like, I can tap into that for my development. And we get that all the time. I probably get 4 or 5 calls a year from people who are like, hey, you got that canal right there. I own land right there. I wanna start watering. What do we need to do to get, and so, and I think part of it's the realtors wanna sell things so bad. They don't do a very good job of disclosing
Well,
that information.
Do you think the county planning and zoning could also do a better job? of
Yeah,
informing?
I've been on our county planning and zoning now for a year and a half.
Oh,
And that's one of the things that I started when I got there, because we have one subdivision that was put in, and they have the middle of the lot, and we've got a 15-foot easement right down the middle of these 2 lots. And I'm like, I guess those are gonna be open space, because nobody's got room to build anything on those. And so we're actually working on a form with our county, and I've got them so they require a letter from the irrigation company that those subdivisions are going in, that they approve the plan and to make sure all those right of ways are there. So it's a lot of education and that kind of stuff that, you know, we never really worried about as farmers, because we're like, we'll just keep on going. But as soon as that older generation dies off, the next generation, all they see is a dollar sign, and it's gone before they're cold in the ground. I mean, I just had that happen. You know, we farmed almost 300 acres of this one guy's farm. He's like, oh yeah, it's gonna stay the same after I die for 10 years and everything else. You know, that's what he told the kids was supposed to happen. He wasn't, grass hadn't even started to grow on the plot, and half of it was already sold. So it's those kind of things that we're dealing with. So.
Dan, you wanna throw something in about development, and then we'll.
Yeah, if I,
Go
just,
for the
just back on
final
the
question.
urbanization impact, so I mentioned a little bit about what we had run up to the 2008 housing bubble. It was much more 20-acre parcel, ranchette type, you know, maybe 5 or 10 new users, you know, new property owners coming into that area. But this last run on housing, we've seen 170 homes within 1 mile of our spring source. So not only are we seeing impacts earlier in the spring of water being less available, but we're also seeing those fields that were traditionally flood irrigated or at least had some sort of conveyance, incidental recharge through ditches or canals, get developed, and we no longer have that. So we've worked a little bit with, there's a neighboring canal company, and there is a shareholder on there who we actually have a supplemental agreement to help manage each other's water through a couple of conveyance systems, just because once again, it's hard for them to send X amount that they need through the canal system because they'll flood out basements and things like that. And just one other quick point, there was a new home this spring, came in right next to an irrigation ditch out there, and they dug the line for the power, and the conduit pump was sitting in there. The day of the water got sent down that ditch, there's 2 feet of water in that trench. So I hope they don't continue to build there, but I don't think they'll stop.
And all of these developments are on septic, or are they actually, is the water coming in and being
They're all
treated?
septic. And everything, and that's one of our big issues up home. Everybody wants to, do the easiest, they just do 2.5 acre lots, there's no clustering, there's no thought on what they're getting rid of, what they're doing, any of those kind of things.
All you have to, my family's like yours is, my mother's family's been in the San Joaquin Valley for almost 140 years. And the impact on the aquifer is just, it's been horrific. Absolutely horrific.
And it's coming, because that's what we're worried about in Teton Valley, is just, they think farmers are putting nitrogen in the ground. No, we want our nitrogen to stay right here. We do not push our nitrogen, because that just costs money. We don't push nitrogen into the ground as a farmer. That's what everybody needs, those dang farmers, all they do is, no, that costs us money. Our bottom lines are this thin, like we were talking about. We don't push our nitrogen out of the root zone, because that's just ridiculous. It's all
Rob's
those
our
other things.
resident expert in that.
Yeah.
We'll have a, which one is it, the water quality session? And we will talk about nutrients and septic and wastewater and development in there, Jack and, others. So, I'm gonna,
It often comes up in discussions online about water use, and if municipal districts that provide potable water to, like Idaho Falls or Pocatello, if they would conserve more water, that has an influence on the water available for agriculture, and that's really not true. So, could you address that?
generally that's not true, because the amount of water used in municipal settings, domestic, municipal, industrial, commercial, is very, very small compared to what irrigation needs. So saving water in a municipal setting is tiny fraction, and so in the big picture, it doesn't have any effect. What Wyatt is talking about is the local effects of having land that used to be flood irrigated, was in agriculture, was in open space. They could manage their water, they could flood irrigate, they could get the aquifer recharged incidentally and keep the water table up. Replaced by housing, it's a double whammy. They're gonna put in a domestic well, so they're pulling out some water. It's a small amount, but locally in Teton Valley could make a difference. But the bigger issue is they're not putting the water back in. They're not, Daniel just said the same thing. You lose the incidental recharge of having a canal system flow through that land and put water on the ground. So it's less water in and more water out locally, and locally that will have a big effect. At the state level, 1%, maybe.
Yeah. And there is a moratorium on.
And there's a moratorium
commercial water development, but there is not for
Domestic, individual
homes. And like you say, that could, like in, your, area of farming, those 170 houses have to have an influence on that spring system.
Yeah, there's more houses that are taking a daily drink of water than there is acres taking a daily drink on our farm.
Well, and actually next week, before we get to the last question here, it's a little after 4, but next week, that's perfect setup. We will have James Cephalo from Idaho Department of Water Resources. He's a water rights administration expert. and Craig Chandler, who's the water master for Water District 1, and Roger Warner, and we're gonna, the whole hour next week will be water management, and water administration, and that's exactly one of the subjects that I asked those guys to think about, so.
Yeah, cause I have an incidental one on that. In India, they taught them how to, they have these little solar powered wells that are out there. And in India, all the farmers thought that was the greatest thing in the world because, you know, you drill a hole down 50 feet, there's aquifer, and then things can start pumping with these little solar powered pumps. Well, they've put enough straws in the ground that now only the richer guys, you know, everybody thought they were gonna get rich, but their aquifer dropped. And so now you gotta have more money to drill a deeper straw. And so it's how many straws you got in the ground. It doesn't matter what size the straw is, how many straws you got in the ground. And that's what we're seeing up in our part of the world.
Okay, well, let's, the last question real quick, ask each of you, let's go down the row here, start with Steve. Just challenges and opportunities you see in the future, things you need to address, you want to address, and how partnerships might help you get there.
Well, it's just, water's only gonna, Wild West, it's only gonna get worse. We're only gonna have more houses coming in. Farming, I mean, it comes down to the dollar for a lot of the farm agriculture. And farmers are looking at every way to be the least cost, you know, spend the least amount of money to grow the crop, but be able to grow as good of a crop as they can, because it's a competitive market. There's very few markets left in the United States that are like agriculture. And so it's a competitive market where the margins are thin and we need to make as much money as we can. And so it seems like everything's kind of coming to a head with this water. It seems like we're getting less snowpack, we're getting more urbanization. Farmers are trying to get every last drop of water they can to get the best yields that they can get. And so we're all going like this, and the best thing we can do right now is continue to work together at trying to figure out, you know, try to stay ahead of it as much as we can to figure it out how we can make make our farms more water efficient, whether it's changes to canal systems, whether it's cover crops. I mean, there's so many different things that we can look into, and you know, we just got to keep moving forward with it.
Yeah, so I think from my standpoint, I mean, this is obviously coming from my background, and then also with HFF is I kind of relish in the complexities and the intricacies of a farm and how they run. And so for me, I welcome the challenge. I think it'll be really good for us to continue to create programs that are beneficial both for farms and fish, and then also inviting more partners to the table continually and getting more perspectives and those sorts of things that I think we can just keep getting better. So I know Steve was kind of more doom and gloom. I think we can get better.
Well, and we will. And the quick story I just want to tell, I think it's kind of cool, is I had my boy out with me, and I had to go to a pump, and it was on Conant Creek, and I had to work on the pump. My wife was like, get him out of the house, I'm tired of him. And so I throw a fishing pole in, and we go down to the pump, and I'm like, okay, I'll just get him fishing, and I'll go work on my pump, and I'll give him something to do. And so I get him and help him, and this is the first cast he's ever thrown his whole life. He throws it out there, first cast, catches a fish. And anyway, I figured he'd be fishing for 2 hours, I'd be able to work on my pump. But I was over there helping him unhook, you know, we're catching and releasing these fish. And it was just, and so now that same boy is 18 years old, and he's got some mild autism, and his favorite thing in the world to do is fish. And it's catch and release. He never wants one to die. I mean, and he absolutely loves it, and everything like that. And I just, you look at our community, this Ashton area, we live in a beautiful, beautiful area. And you look at a map and you see all the rivers and the creeks, the streams that run through here, the lakes that we have east of Ashton. I mean, what an amazing place. And it's like, it's something that we want to continue on forever, that we can farm here but that we can also enjoy our area and enjoy these waters that we have and put it back in there. And that's something that you know, trying to be a little more positive. It's something I hope that this is something we can look back at, Daniel and I, down the road, that you know, we were kind of the pioneers in this area of saying, listen, we can do this, we can farm, we can have these waters, we can have these fishing opportunities and all be here together. So
Wyatt, you gonna be doom or gloom or positive or all of the above?
Well, the whole outlook that I see, because that's my big thing, you know, my ancestors, you know, we just hit 100 years, there should be another 100 more, so what's gonna be the best road I can take for those next 100 years? I don't look at what my future holds, I look a couple generations down the road, and water's gonna be one of those big main issues, as well as, you know, what do we do for the urban sprawl, those kind of things. But to be able to keep myself in there for the next 100 years, I look at it as it's gonna take all of us working together, because that's the big main thing. So, you know, some of the main issues I see, urbanization, how do you deal with people wanting to move here? We live in the most beautiful place in, you know, everybody's trying to move here, everybody wants a vacation home here, but that's really not sustainable. It's like, build a couple more hotels, let them stay there, so that we can decrease that effect that it has all the way through. Because when a farmer has to plant his last crop, that's the last crop he's gonna plant, is that house crop. There needs to be more incentive to keep the younger people in. The ag statistics just came out. The average age of a farmer went from 56 to what, 3? Something like that.
62.5.
Yeah. So there is no new farmers coming in, because what's in there for them? You know, they hear all the complaints that we have as farmers, and they're like, why would I put up with that? Why am I gonna work from sun up to sundown? You know, I like it when the time starts, the days get a little bit shorter. My wife likes that because she sees me a little more. But why would they want to put themselves through that? But it's, you know, it's the lifestyle, it's all those things that we have. But to be able to attract new people into those things, you know, if you're not born into it, it's really hard to attract new people into that. But there has to be an incentive. There has to be something that will bring them in to do those. And if it's, you know, partnerships that can bring more profit to the farm, make it easier to farm, those kind of things, it's gonna be a lot better. Because we don't live in the easiest place to farm. I still question why 100 years ago they came here. You know, I guess they wanted 3 months of farming instead of 7 or 8. You know, my grandpa on the other side is in Wyatt County over there. So he's got the longest growing season, and I'm like, yeah, I still like the snow and only having to farm 3 months, even if I have to work hard. So there's lots of incentives that I see right there. That's one of our big things. Because as soon as that generation, this next generation's done farming, what are they gonna do? We don't wanna get any bigger, which is tougher.
So after hearing about us whine a little bit about it, I got a quick joke, it'll be really fast. What does a farmer and a 747 jet have in common? They both whine all the way to and from Hawaii. Anyway.
That's good. Scott, you have a last word here.
Well, I'll tell you what,
Some wisdom.
I'm a little bit of a glasses half full guy, but it doesn't really matter. Well, I'm thrilled to hear these guys being somewhat glasses half full, because I mean, it's you know, you grow up and live in a rural area. A lot of times, you know, especially these days, with as interconnected as the world is, it's easy to get overwhelmed a little bit. But I keep bringing it back to the local partnership theme of today. The more you can focus on those local partnerships and kind of, you know, keep the rest of the world at bay, at least for a little bit, I think you can come up with some really positive things. And I think the future is going to hinge on local, state, regional, and national, both perception and reaction to stressors. because things are changing, climate's changing. I mean, when I worked with farmers and ranchers, they were the first ones to tell me that they were seeing things change. And that was back in the late 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And so whether it's drought and climate, whether it's cropping, whether it's national or international commodities issues, environmental issues, conservation issues, those are all in certain ways stressors. And so partnerships are going to be critical to how you address those stressors. And to come back to the local part again, there's going to be all kinds of local solutions. You heard about a bunch of them today. But local options are not going to be the only solutions sometimes. So the more that these small communities can get out in front of these issues, even if they're really hard and even if they're really complicated, the more control that local community is going to have. And these guys have talked about it. They're taking control of these issues. They're partnering with, folks like the Henry's Fork Foundation. They're partnering with federal and state agencies for funding to get some of these things done. And that's the exciting part. That's the exciting part. And you bring it back to the partnership. You get these things done on the ground. They can last for decades. And then you can deal with them again. But the bottom line is those solutions that last for decades are way different than what was happening 30, 40, 50 years ago. And a lot of times it's because of the partnerships and it's because of the commitment to providing capital to invest on the ground for those solutions. So it's pretty exciting. And just, I always try to do that these days as the old guy, a huge pat on the back to the Henry's Fork Foundation for this local community for taking these things seriously and for trying to address them. It doesn't always work, and a lot of times there's arguments, especially when you do have tough, dry years. That hasn't changed. But at the same time, having worked all over the West, the things that have been accomplished here are really, really important and really, really exciting. So I'll just close with that.
Well, thanks, Scott, and thank you all. This was fantastic. It was great to have you here. And we do, Jasper has some gifts for our guests for coming and participating. Appreciate it. And so, thank you guys again. It was great fun. I really enjoyed it. So next week, yeah, well, he lives here.